So I will be talking mainly about physiotherapy because I'm a physiotherapist, but I will touch on other areas as well, such as orthotics. See our colleagues at the back there, and also occupational therapy as well, because I work very closely with those colleagues. But thinking about physiotherapy and what we do and what we can help you with, that's a generic physiotherapist. They love gym balls, physios. So with physios, I wanted to sort of give you an idea of where we're coming from when you come in to see us, because hopefully that will help you to know actually what we can help you with. So the first thing that we want to do, when we see you for the first time, and some of you here, I see faces I know who've been to see me in the past, we want to assess, have a look at you, see what the issues are that you might have come in with that maybe we can help with. Because what we want to do is to maybe prevent or sort of minimise specific issues you might have or specific symptoms relating to your CMT. It might not just be your CMT, there might be other things going on that's impacting as well, and we're interested in that too. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is get you to be able to function or do what you need to do as well as possible. So we want to optimise that, make that as good as we can. And we do like to, I personally do like to, if I see you, to review you. Sometimes that might be every year. I might catch up with you in Prof. I's clinic, or in the clinic I do with Dr. Laura, or in my own clinic. But I do like to sort of know, or sometimes people just email me with a bit of feedback. I always like to know how people are getting on. And there's another thing that we do quite a lot, where because you have CMT for many years, you live with CMT, and sometimes you guys have worked out what helps you and what doesn't help you quite a lot. And there's this area in therapies, in rehabilitation, called self-management. So just to sort of, so you might hear that banded around, so I just want to make it clear what that is, because I think sometimes people think, well, that's just me being left on my own to get on with it. If it's done well, it isn't. So actually, self-management, I actually don't really like the term because it does imply you're sort of left on your own, but actually it shouldn't be. It should be that you are supported by us as health professionals to basically live well with CMT. And there might be a few different things that we can help to signpost or help you with to do that. So, but the first element is that you live with this every day. You can come in and tell me what it's like, what's working, what actually isn't working, and where there might be issues that you want some help with. And we call that sort of self-discovery. This is sort of self-management speak and jargon coming through here. It might be about knowledge, and I think a lot of what today is about for my session here is actually giving you some knowledge of some of the research that's out there, things that we've tried, things that we're looking at, so that you know all the ins and outs of your condition. It might be that if there's specific things that you identify when you come and see me, that we might sort of set a few targets or a few goals to work towards. And that's something that comes within the whole self-management side of things. And then supporting you to be able to take action. And because at the end of the day, I can give you the knowledge, I can maybe help signpost things, but it's about you feeling confident enough to take action and how we can help you in that. Then once you do take action, being able to think, well, how did that go? How did that help me? And then being able to solve problems. I actually think that most of the people I see who come in are actually already really good problem solvers because you've had to over the years. But if people are struggling a bit with that, then we can help people to find their way through. And actually how to use resources in the best way. And through this talk, I'm going to be dipping into some of these areas and filling in some of the gaps. For example, the knowledge and also some of the resources. Because as a physio, if you come and see the physio, we're quite interested in things like that you might have, like falls, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail, and balance problems, if your hands are clumsy and making things a bit tricky, and issues with walking. And physios will look at that, and there might be different reasons for that. Is it because the muscles are tight? Is that what's causing those issues? Is it because somebody's not very fit at the moment? Is that why walking is difficult? Is it because that people are very tired, and we know fatigue's a big issue, as we have earlier from Prof. Riley? Joint pain as well. Again, we heard a lot about pain and how, you know, if I were to have a stone in my shoe, my walking would change because of the pain. So we know pain alters movement patterns. So what impact is that having as well? And numbness, if you can't feel well, what does that do to your balance? What's it like when it's dark or you're in the cinema and things like that? So these are the different. This is the way our minds work in terms of what we're thinking about when we're looking at what issues you've got. So if we think about walking, what I'm going to do now is sort of go through some of those key areas, tell you a little bit about what we have looked at, and when we've looked at a lot of people with CMT, what we understand some of the issues are, and sort of some of the research that's been going on into different rehabilitation treatments that might help. So with walking, I've been interested in walking for quite a long time, and we know, and you can tell me this, but often the problems with walking are because the feet drop, and also because the calf muscles in some people get quite weak as well, and that doesn't give you that push that propels you along. That's often why walking is slower. We did some work a few years ago for my PhD where we looked at, because we see that the hip muscles have to work quite hard to compensate for that. So what's the impact of that? And so in fact, I think one or two people here actually did this study quite a long time ago where we walked people on a treadmill. And what we found was that once the hip muscles got tired, that's when people stopped walking. So those muscles are under a bit more burden. And we also found, that this is a sort of a funny table, but we had 18 people CMT, and we matched them to people who didn't have CMT but were about the same age and gender and similar stature. And we got the people without CMT to walk for the same amount of time on the treadmill at the same speed that people with CMT did. And there's a scale we use, it's called the Borg scale. So it's about how much effort you put into something. So like 9 on the Borg scale is no effort at all. I think 11 is a little bit hard, and then 13 is somewhat hard. So there's these descriptors that go with the numbers. And so for exactly the same walking task, the same time, the same distance and the same speed, the people without CMT were only rating 8, so it wasn't really that much effort for them. But the people with CMT were rating 17. So we know that walking is much more effortful compared to people who don't have CMT. And that's one of the reasons why endurance is less. You can't walk as far and you have to stop and have a rest. Then there's balance and falls. So we did a survey quite a while ago now where we found that, you know, you'll say, yes, I know this because I live with this all the time, but we wanted to see, was this a common pattern for people? And people fall, more than half of people fall at least once a month. And I think that's kind of what we hear when in clinic as well, that falling is quite a common problem. And in terms of where people fall, and it's like Mary was saying earlier, you know, when you're walking around at home, so indoors private, it's basically people's homes, you might take your splints off, you might be a little bit more relaxed because you're in your home environment, but actually most falls happen at home. It might be footwear as well. So we want to sort of explore that a little bit more. So there's a couple of things we're working on now. So I've got my update slides with the sort of the blue heading update. So as Magda said earlier, we're developing an app with a computer guy at Kingston University where Magda's registered for her PhD. So we wanted to find a way of recording falls simply. When we did a study looking at falls a little while ago, we had postcards and people would post them back, but it was a real pain, and people said, oh, there's got to be an easier way with technology that we can do this. So we've come up with a phone app. It's still in development stage, and that's why we can't give it out at the moment because it's not finished, but that's why we just want a bit of feedback, see what do you think of the look of it, is the categories right, and that sort of thing. So for the falls one, so it's like, when did it happen, where, was it indoors, outdoors, any injuries, and why do you think you fell? And for us, that's the really important bit about trying to identify what the main cause of falls are. So we're looking at this in the study that Magda's going to be doing, and which I'll tell you about in a moment. This is one of our ways of recording falls, and if it works well, we may well sort of roll it out and see if we can get a bigger picture from getting information from lots of people. So we really liked your feedback. I know a few of you have given us actually great feedback so far, things that we hadn't thought of that we can add in. So moving on to hands, and so I said about clumsy hands, and there's a physio in Holland who's looked a lot at this, and so she sort of looked at, well, what can determine how much you can do with your hands, and all of these things seem to be important. So the degree of weakness, if the sensation was down, if the muscles tire, and a lot of people tell me that, particularly with writing. Some of our university students find that their hands start to tire after writing in lectures. That because I'm always interested in how you tie your laces. I'm always watching when you come to clinic. I don't think I'm not watching because I realise how people have adapted their grip to do different things, and how dexterous your hands are seems to relate to how much weakness you have in those muscles. And then that has an impact on being able to do fiddly things, buttons, zips, and that sort of thing. And that affects then day-to-day things. It's funny, actually, it would be interesting, and I'd like for some of you to come and look at the app. Actually, is it easy to use physically? Not just is the information there, but is the setup easy to use if you do have some hand weakness? And all of those things can impact on quality of life. Pain, I won't talk lots about pain because actually Mary gave a really good explanation of pain earlier in terms of the different types, in terms of joints and nerve pain. But we know it's something that when people come to clinic that we pay a lot of attention to. I think particularly if it is joint pain, that's something I know that as a physio I may be able to help in terms of thinking about, is it because of tight muscles, is it because of where the weight is when people are walking, and then our orthotics colleagues, orthotist colleagues may be able to help with that. So that's an area I pay a lot of attention to. And then tiredness. I know there were some questions about tiredness as well. So we know it happens a lot. You know, it's severe fatigue in 64% of people. And it was a reasonably big study, this, in Holland. We know that people report different types of fatigue. And we did a focus group a few years ago. And the sort of thing that people were saying, there's different types of fatigue. There's tiredness and there's a fatigue tiredness, and we see them as two different things. We can be tired and it's just normal if you've done a lot. And I think when people say to me, if I'm walking a lot, my legs get tired here, that's actually normal fatigue. I think we would all get that. But then they go on to say there's the fatigue tiredness, and that's the overwhelming tiredness where your whole body feels like you've got to stop and drags, and what people were saying is that was overwhelming, and it was abnormal. It wasn't normal fatigue. It's just interesting how people describe that. And this overwhelming thing is that, you know, it hits like a tidal wave, and I can feel it approaching, and it's absolutely overwhelming. I just have to sit down and then I'm asleep. And there's a couple of nods here. You know, I think people identified with that. It might be linked to how physically active people are. I'll come on to this a little bit later in terms of things we're looking at. But it's interesting how people say, you know, again, it's the whole body shuts down. It's like everything is heavy. So, because there might be this issue with fitness that I've mentioned, we looked at activity levels in people with CMT. These are the people who did, there's an exercise study we did a while ago, not the recent one, but one we did a few years ago, and a couple of you did do that study. So we had 20 people with CMT, 20 people who didn't, and we got everyone to wear activity monitors for 7 days. And this sort of fancy one that works out how many calories you expend in a day and all of that sort of thing. And what we found is actually wasn't much difference in people's energy levels when we matched up what the hours that people were moving around. But what was different is how many steps people were taking. You know, the government recommends we should all take 10,000 steps a day. And the people who didn't have CMT did about 11,500 on average. That's what that bar shows. And the people with CMT did about 6,500. So people aren't walking. What's interesting is that actually the energy levels that were expended was similar. And I don't know if it's just because that was an issue to do with how the armband measures calories and where people might have muscle wasting, or whether or not that just shows that walking is more effortful. I'm not sure yet, really. We'd need to pick that apart more. But the other thing we did find from that study is we looked at how sedentary people were. A couple of you have seen this graph before, because I have presented it before here. But we looked at body mass index, so that's your height and your weight. That sort of basically is an indicator of how overweight you might be. There's lots of flaws with it, but it's sort of quite commonly used. And how heavy people were, or how big people were, related to how long they spent sitting. It wasn't about how much vigorous activity they did, or even moderate activity. The longer people sat still, or lay, or didn't do anything, the bigger they tended to be. And actually, what was interesting, in the group that didn't have CMT, that we were matched to, it was exactly the same. And you might hear now there's all these initiatives from the government about being active, physically active, and sitting is toxic, and all of this sort of thing. It actually makes a lot of sense, and this is what we're seeing in lots and lots of groups of people. So, again, our app that I talked about, so we're going to play around with whether or not this is a good way of finding out about people's activity levels. So you can monitor it yourself, and be able to record it, and also for us to understand what people are doing. So we've got a couple of drop-down menus. One of them is for activity. This is not exercise, this is just day-to-day activity, because you can have a very active job or be up and about a lot in the day, and that's good, because that still gives you physical benefits. And I think in the end, everybody thinks about exercise, but actually just being up and about is very beneficial. So this is asking about different types of activities, household chores, working in the garden, having a physically active job, active hobbies, that sort of thing. And then we've also asked a bit more about exercise itself. So this is very small, but please come and have a look at our app, and then you'll be able to read it and give us some feedback. So it might be balance exercises, Tai Chi and yoga, Pilates, walking, muscle strengthening. So we've got a sort of a drop-down menu so people can log and when they did it and how long they did it for. So again, lots of some feedback would be really, really valuable if you don't mind. So now what I'll talk about are specific treatments. So I'll talk about exercise, and we'll bring balance training into that. I'll talk a bit about orthoses and splints as well, because we have done a little bit of work about that, and we'll talk about fatigue and fatigue management as well. So with exercise, we hear all the time about the benefits of exercise. So it can keep you stronger, keep you going for longer with the endurance, and that can help you do more on a day-to-day basis. It can help to reduce fatigue, we think. We're going to investigate that a bit further. Control your weight, and it makes people feel better. And actually, it's interesting how when people have suddenly started doing a lot of exercise, they've been going to the gym or they've started something new, the one thing they all say is, I feel so much better for it. So there's different types of exercise. There's sort of the aerobic training, which is the fitness one, where you get a bit out of puff, a little bit sweaty, a little bit flushed in the cheeks. So that's an aerobic exercise, when you get a bit out of puff. Then there's actual specific muscle strengthening, where you might be using a load somehow, whether it's weights or a band or something like that. There's stretching to try and lengthen the muscles, and then there's balance exercises as well. So with aerobic exercise, we often prescribe this quite a lot actually, because we want to increase people's general fitness, because that helps their ability to meet the demands of the day, or being able to work or being able to commute and that sort of thing. And because it can help to reduce some of the effort as well in those day-to-day tasks. And we do think there's a hint that it might reduce fatigue as well from a small study that was done of exercise bike training, that the fatigue levels of the people who did the training did reduce. And while drugs don't seem to be effective to reduce fatigue, exercise seems to be something that could. And sort of what you do, so whether or not it's bikes or whether or not it's swimming, in a way doesn't matter when it comes to aerobic exercises. Anything that gets you a bit out of puff. Some people like using the hand pedals, some people as well as the exercise bikes, rowing machines, that sort of thing. Then there's muscle strengthening. So either using a load, like the lady on the right here, a weight, or actually using your body weight. So in this exercise on the left, the body weight is helping to strengthen the leg muscles there. And so we know that some of the muscles, as we heard about CMT being a length-dependent issue, some of the muscles below the knees are very much affected by the CMT itself. But higher up, less so, and in some people really not the CMT doesn't really affect up here much at all. But what we do see, and some of the work by our colleague Jasper Morrow, who you heard about earlier, some of the MRI work, he saw that some of the muscles up here get a bit smaller. That's not CMT, they get a bit smaller because they're not being used very much. We call that disuse weakness or disuse atrophy. So it's not the CMT, it's a knock-on effect of not moving around as much. And if you're, so we want to try and reverse that, because we can get that back, that's reversible. Weakness that's primarily because of the CMT, we won't get that back, but anything that's secondary, that's an improving situation, we can work on that. If people are stronger, it reduces effort, and hopefully will impact on fatigue as well. You might see that the muscles activate better, that the muscles might bulk out a little bit more, if you like that. So this is a bridging exercise, so this is one to do some of the leg muscles here and the hip muscles. So it's just about lifting up and holding and getting some stability. It helps with the core muscles as well. And I think the key thing is, and this relates back to what Jasper found with the MRI study, is if you don't use it, you do lose it. So there's what's happening with the CMT, but all the other muscles as well. And so with strengthening, you have to be a little careful with some of the smaller, weaker muscles. But on the whole, people can strengthen quite well. If you're not sure, then a physio might be able to help guide you, or a personal trainer. And actually, they might give you, the personal trainers, I think, actually do more interesting exercises than physios do often. They might try different sort of machinery or different equipment and that sort of thing. And I'm often giving advice to physical trainers, so they will often link in with physios just to get advice about the condition, anything they need to avoid or not, or try and work on. I think if muscles are very weak, just don't go too heavy. So I'm not saying don't do it, but don't go too heavy. My rule of thumb is that if you can work a muscle against gravity, then that's okay. If you can't, I probably wouldn't be loading it because it's weak already, and we're just not sure yet what might happen. But with the muscles that you can move, go for it. And particularly the ones, as I was saying, higher up, shoulders, trunk, tops of the legs, I'd really recommend it. And sort of low to moderate weight training, if people are wanting to be a little bit cautious. And an idea is if we usually get people to do sort of 8 to 10 repetitions. And when you're doing it, if you think about a 0 to 10 scale, so 0 is it's really easy, no effort at all. 10 is if it's really maximal effort and you can't do it. So you want to be aiming for about a 5 or 6 out of 10 when you're doing sort of 8, 9 repetitions. And that's usually about right. That fits with this low to moderate side of things. We do have some people come to the clinic who actually do push quite big weights, but they've done it for some time and they've trained carefully, and they're okay. But I wouldn't just jump straight into anything like that. You have to build it up gradually and get a bit of advice if you're not sure. And what I would say, a cautious approach would be actually to increase the number of repetitions, perhaps rather than the weight, because actually that helps with the endurance anyway. Really, going very heavy and a short number of repetitions only really helps if you want to bulk out and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you actually want to think about how your muscles work day to day, then actually endurance is probably better. Now, muscle soreness, if you first start doing any exercise, particularly weight training, is normal. If I were to go and start throwing something heavy around, I'd get muscle soreness. And the normal soreness lasts for about 2 days. Some of you might have experienced that, yeah? So, but if it lasts longer than that, then you've probably overdone it a bit. And then maybe, again, seek a bit of advice or just pull back a little bit. Then there's stretching, which is really important, particularly of the ankles and of the foot muscles. So with stretching, we want to try and reduce muscle shortening, and we know certain muscles are vulnerable to getting tight. So the calf muscles, the muscles within the arch of the foot as well. And sometimes the front of the hip. So this is an exercise some of you might have been taught. So it's a lunge. So you keep the heel down and then take the body forward to try and stretch the calf. And that one to the right is just to stretch the Achilles tendon. This one is to stretch the front of the hip. So you drop the leg off to try and stretch the front of the hip, and you just hug your knee so that it's not just your back tilting, it actually goes into the muscle, the stretch is in the muscle. So this might be to actually to prevent tightness coming on. It's not just if you already have tightness. And we really very much say that particularly the ankle stretches should just be done anyway to stop this happening, rather than trying to solve a problem once it's already come on. And we think that if the muscles are not tight and the joints are working their full range, then the effort of the muscles working around those joints is better as well, if they're working in normal ranges. So sometimes a physio can help with working out which muscles do need stretching, but certainly the ankle muscles on the whole usually are ones we target. We do recommend that people stretch daily. Make it part of your routine, like your morning routine. If you've got, usually you need to hold on to something, you can hold on to the sink in the bathroom while you're stretching. Holding for about 30 seconds is what's recommended in the research on stretching. But if you do have a lot of reduced feeling, then just be mindful of what position the foot is in or the joint is in, and that's, again, a physio can help with that. Then there's balance training, which, again, because we're very interested in falls and balance, that we're looking at the moment. So with balance training, what we try and do is get people to try and challenge their stability. Because as Mary said earlier, your brain and spinal cord is normal. And our balance centres are in the sort of the back and the middle, well, the lower part of the brain. And they work all the time to try and improve our balance if we challenge them. So for me, I was never good at gym. You know, if I was to walk on one of those beams, I'd fall off. But if I kept doing it and practiced, I might be able to make a couple of steps. But it's by that challenging my balance that I would learn how to do it over time. And we think that's probably something that you can all do as well, to different degrees. So that's why people who come and see me in physio, I'll often do some tests of balance. I might get you standing with feet together, I might get you turning your body, I might get you standing like that and see where we can challenge your balance, but do it safely. So I always get people to do it near a solid support. Kitchens are great because work surfaces are a really good height to be able to do that safely. And it's about sort of practicing little and often with balance. I usually get, if you're doing it in the kitchen, so when the kettle's boiling is a good time to do it, because there's nothing else to do while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. So actually just doing a couple of minutes training your balance, it can be quite useful. So, of course, there's me going, you know, exercise, different types, but does it work? So there's been lots of little studies of exercise, different types of exercise in CMT. Well, let's say lots, there's actually not been that many, there's only been 11. There's a study by some colleagues of ours in Sydney who looked at all the studies that have been done so far, and there's a way that we can sort of put them together and see whether or not we can get some overall advice based on them. So they looked at some studies of strength, of aerobic exercise, balance and stretching. In fact, one of the studies of strength was one we did a few years ago when we were looking at strengthening the hip muscles. And 6 of the studies found that by doing exercise with weights, then you can get some improvements in strengthening the muscles higher up. But the other 3 types, there weren't many studies, and actually what they said is there's a lot more that needs to be done. But at least it's a start. At least we're starting to get some information through, but there's still lots of gaps that we need to look at. So one of the things that we're doing, I know there's a few people here who've done this study, who know us well. So we're just about to finish. Our last person with CMT is coming through on Tuesday. And so this is a study of exercise bike training that people have done in local gyms. I see some sage nods of some of our participants. So in local gyms, it's based in London, but actually people were coming in from around the home counties as well. Because we thought rather than, it's a nightmare to get into central London and just have one of us stand over and make you use the exercise bike, it was better to be in people's communities. And so we in total we wanted to aim for 30. We recruited 31, but we had some dropouts. But number 28 will come on Tuesday. And so people worked on these recumbent bikes here. And it was 3 times a week and for 12 weeks. Yes, thank you. Thanks, John. So we did that, and we measured lots of things. We measured fitness levels, quite tough tests actually, some of the fitness tests. We looked at leg strength, we looked at fatigue levels, and body fat percentage, sleep. There's lots of other ones. Magda was one of our measurers for this study as well, still is. You're going to be there on Tuesday as well, yep. And so we looked at lots of different things. And also, there was a question earlier about qualitative research in CMT, and there is very little. But one of the things we are doing, we've got a professor of psychology from Surrey University. She doesn't have CMT, but she has muscle disease, so she has a particular way of looking at it. And so she's doing interviews of people who have done our study, completely independent of us, so people don't feel pressured, to see what they thought about exercising in gyms, because some people seem to like it, but some people actually don't like the gym environment at all. But that's important information, you know, if we're going to be making recommendations, and what it felt like to actually go through that sort of program. And so, because we're just collating all of the data now, and spreadsheet heaven in our office at the moment, and then we'll be sending it all off to the statistician to analyse next month, and hopefully we'll be interested to see what results we have. So we will be communicating those to you once we've gone through them. But also to let you know, it's not just us doing work. There's a big study that's in Italy, and I haven't had any results from that yet, no, but they're looking at lots of different exercises. They're looking at treadmill walking, balance exercises, breathing exercises, stretching exercises. They're doing it like a package of rehab, as it were, in people with CMT 1A as well. So that's all across Italy. There's lots of centres doing that in Genoa and Rome and in Milan. So there's been some early information coming out on some of their baseline data, but we're waiting to hear what the results of that are as well. So these are going to be important studies on exercise to give us a bit more information. And this is what we're about to do. So, as I said, we're very interested in balance and how that impacts on falls. And this is one of the reasons we're developing the app, because we'll probably use this as one of our measures in this study. So I have to say thank you to CMT UK, because they've helped to fund this with that, and then with Magda's PhD as well. So we're doing a pilot study of home-based balance training. We're doing it in London at the moment, because when you're doing big studies like this, particularly when it's quite complicated interventions like rehab, it's not a pill, don't forget. It's a whole series of things that we might individualise to somebody. So we need to do small studies just to see, does this look like it could be helpful? How many people might we need to get an answer? So we do these pilot studies first, and then we may then be able to go for funding for a bigger study if it's looking promising. So we're at that early stage now. It's important we do that. And also, is it feasible? So we want to do home-based balance training. Do people like that? Or do people actually find that I don't really want to be doing this at home? So we want to, is it feasible? Do people want to do it? So that's where we are now. So we're going to be doing a combination of balance exercises and leg strengthening and core strengthening, because we know how important that is for balance as well. Next week is the ethics meeting, so we're hoping that it gets through. Poor Magda's been having a really fun time with ethics forms and approvals forms lately for this. And it should start this summer. And also, what the CMT UK is funding a physio for us to be able to do the home-based training, so that we've got that job description written. So we're going to put the advert out very soon. I've already had a couple of people interested, actually, who were quite good. So I'm confident we'll recruit. Thank you very much for that opportunity from CMT UK. Okay. So that's kind of what we're doing. But just more generally, activity, exercise, we know it's good, we know it can actually be really difficult to do. And so thinking about how to stay motivated, and something that we've learned through doing the exercise trial is not everyone likes the gym. The gym isn't for everyone. But what we would say, what seems to happen, just from hearing people talking when they come into clinic, about finding something fun. This was a few years ago. So there might be a few familiar people on here. So this was the CMT UK evening, I think it was about 5 years ago, was it? 5 years ago. So dancing, everyone loves dancing. That's why Zumba's been so popular. But actually finding something you enjoy and something fun. And actually, I think, Mary, you said this earlier, don't underestimate the convenience of maybe we had somebody who had his exercise bike in the garage, you know, and so it's really easy to be able to go and do that. I was talking to somebody who came to see me the other day, and there's a gym just opening up in a golf club just across the road from her. She said, I know it's just going to make life so much easier. So do try and think of something that's nearby and convenient for you, because most people are more likely to do it. And don't start too hard, start very gradually. With our exercise trial, we start people gradually and we build it up over the 12 weeks. If you go in too hard and you're really sore and you hate it and it just feels horrible, you're not going to want to go back and do it. Build up gradually, definitely. And also, find a buddy. I'm like this. If it's left to me, you know, I'm not always that motivated, and I should be, because I'm trying to tell people about it. But if somebody's keeping an eye on me, or it's like we do a run every year as a group, as a team, from Queen Square. So we all kind of check up on each other. We might go for a run together, and we're all doing it together, so everyone's got this target. And that works really well. It means that we all run 10K at least once a year. And set some goals, some targets as well. And that's just not, you know, it might be for me, it would be, you know, in fact, I'm planning, and I'll announce it publicly now for hearing about the fundraising earlier. I'm going to do the Great South Run in October, raise money for CMT UK. So that's my target. But at the moment, that'd be my second time. I have done it, but not for a little while, so I'm due, aren't I? At the moment, I'm only running about a couple of miles, so that's my goal. So I think, right, okay, so probably in about 2 weeks' time, I might be able to do 2 miles if I do 2 runs a week. And so you can set steps to that goal, and that's what I'm going to do myself. And also, don't underestimate this as well, what we call the non-exercise activity. So this is that might be if you've got an active job, or just that, remember that graph, spending a long time sitting isn't good for you. So actually just breaking up sitting, I think, can probably be very beneficial. Standing, a lot of people are into these standing desks now and things like that, because they recognise that people are just really sedentary. I quite like them actually. I've tried. The worst is the treadmill desk. Now that gets really horrible. Yeah. And it's things that get you generally moving as well, and you'll know that yourself. Just in terms of other information that's out there, some work that a group of physios with an expertise in neuromuscular conditions, and if some of you remember Liz Dewar, who used to work with us, she led a lot of this with a couple of other physios, and I had an oversee as well. That MD UK, so Muscular Dystrophy UK, you can link to this. They've got some guidelines on adults with muscle wasting conditions. So obviously that's there to cover everybody who's under the MD UK remit, but actually the advice would be pertinent to all of you. I looked at it, I can say, yeah, that would be pertinent to all of you. So that's one. The other one, and this is the American lady who lives in London who does a lot for CMTA, collared me a few years ago and said, we need to do some videos for CMTA, want to do it and put it on YouTube. And some of you might know Rebecca Lee, who's she's a physio and she has CMT. So Rebecca did all the hard work. I just had a look at the content of these just to see that it was right and reviewed the videos. And they're great, actually. And so if I just do a little link, so you can find them on YouTube. And so there's different ones. There's a balance one, a stretching one, there's a strength one. And it's right that it's Rebecca doing it and not me, really. So just some, I don't think it's playing. It's playing on here, but I don't think it's playing on there. No, never mind. But just go onto YouTube and have a look, and you'll be able to see those.
I put some of them on our website, actually. But
yeah, some links. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, the videos, but they're good, and I think Rebecca's actually really interested in exercise, and she's doing a master's in looking at exercise, so we've been keeping in touch about that as well. The other thing to know about is something called exercise on prescription. So this is where GPs can prescribe exercise at local facilities. So there's a lot of these initiatives around now in your local area. I think it varies a bit locally, so find out if you're interested in it. And that means that going to gyms and that sort of thing can either be free or heavily discounted. And it is often focused on sort of heart disease and obesity, those common issues in people's local areas. but GPs can be persuaded. I've written a few letters about this, because it's about preventing those things where it's going to be harder to be able to access exercise or to be able to exercise. So if you are interested in that, then speak to your GP about that, about getting exercise on prescription. There's other things as well. This is the Inclusive Fitness Initiative. So there's a website where you can look at gyms in your area which are accessible and can give support for people with disabilities. And another one which I love actually, because that's about sort of gyms and that kind of thing, but this I love because this is Sportability. This isn't about going to the gym, this is about getting out there and moving, a little bit like the work that Karen's been doing with CMT Kids. It's about getting outdoors, you know, being able to see what is something that's more fun basically than just going to the gym, you know, kayaking, climbing and that sort of thing. And there are different sportability groups in different regions. So again, get on the website, have a little look, see what's out there, see what you fancy. Quad biking through streams might appeal to some people, not me so much. But that's the exercise side of things. Okay, so I'm going to take a slight different turn now and think now more specifically about orthotics. So with orthotics, sometimes someone will come and see me and I'll give them orthotics, simple orthotics, or I might refer them to our orthotics clinic or to one locally. And so insoles or foot orthoses are very commonly used, and some of you have probably got them in your shoes now. And the reasons we might use them is if people have got pain, if their ankle's a bit unstable, or if the heel or the foot is turning, but if I can get in and I can correct that position with my hand, then an insole might be able to do that as well. And so if you redistribute the pressure under the foot, sometimes that can get rid of some of those pressure points that can be very painful, where you might get a lot of callus and a lot of hard skin, and then it feels like you're walking on pebbles. So it can help to reduce that. And if somebody is a little bit wobbly when they're walking, actually having something around the heel can make them a bit more stable. And as I said, if you put wedges in the right place, it can actually help to straighten someone's foot and ankle up, providing that they're loose enough. So those might be reasons that we might do it. And as I say, if it's something quite simple, there's off-the-shelf insoles that we do, but anything that's complex, and actually we do send a lot of people to our orthotist. We're very lucky that our orthotics clinic have a lot of experience with CMT, and so often know what they can prescribe. The other thing about foot orthoses that are interesting, has always interested me, is if you have a sort of something that's of a certain shape under the foot, does it give a little bit more feedback? Because you've got those lumps and bumps as you're moving around. It might give you a bit more feedback if your sensation's reduced, and if that's having an impact on your balance. So that's one thing. I did a study years ago in people with MS looking at that. But also, how about now with some of the technologies we have? What about if actually the insoles give a more active feedback? So we've been approached by a company that are looking at this device, so insoles that actually vibrate. So if you move to a certain part, so there's little sensors under different parts of the foot, and if you put a bit more pressure on there, it gives you a feedback. We call this sensory augmentation. It's been looked at in other conditions, in other hands and that sort of thing, in other people after stroke and that sort of thing. So they've approached us. It's all in sort of prototype phase, but we don't know if it will help with CMT. So what we're just going to do is very simply get them in some sandals, get people to stand on them, get them to just do a couple of things in standing and see what happens, see if there's any potential. They might work, might not, we don't know. Because if you've already got sensory loss, is that going to be enough? So this is something we're just doing we've got a little pot of funding from the university to just look at this. So that's something that again, Magda's been getting all in fact the ethics meeting was on Friday, wasn't it? So we're waiting to hear whether or not we've got that one. So we should be able to start that soon. Then there's these ankle foot orthoses, so the bigger splints, and some of you will have them, some of you won't. And they can help things like foot drop if your feet do flop down. Also, they can help to stabilise the ankle when you're actually standing on that leg and swinging the other one through, and that can be really important for some people. And also if your ankle is a bit unstable side to side, if it wobbles a bit, they can help to stabilise that. There's lots and lots of different types. There's some which, again, we can give off the shelf, like some of these ankle braces, or like this one there. There are some which are custom made, like some of the plastic ones, like the Saphos, and we've got the Sapho stand there, and some of the metal calipers that some people still find useful. Some of them are very flexible, some of them are much more rigid. And actually what works for you will very much depend on how much weakness you have, how stiff your joints are, and so we very much look at that to see what works for you. So do they work? There have been quite a few little studies, again small studies, looking at AFOs. So looking, and what they overall they seem to be showing is that there are some change, that they do tend to improve foot drop and can help walking, so some of the walking measures. And that's been shown in some of the plastic splints, some of the ankle braces. We did a small study a few years ago looking at some of the off-the-shelf braces, carbon fibre splints. There's been a little bit of work in the Saphos, the silicone AFOs, and as our colleagues in Australia looked at these sensory splints and looked at the effects on walking. So they're very light splints that actually maybe don't do so much in terms of supporting the ankle, but again might give feedback. Although they actually thought it probably was a mechanical effect with that as well. One of the tricky things is that there's actually so many devices out there to test. There's lots and lots of them. They're coming out all the time. There's different shaped carbon fibre ones. Some of you might have heard of this Helios brace that they're really heavily marketing from the States. They cost a fortune. And then there's other different ones that we've just found that have been useful incidentally. And so that's tricky. So actually, I've been working with a group on some of you I think knew about it. We went up on the Facebook page, got involved with a study looking at orthoses. They were mainly concentrated on knee orthoses, but actually some of the information was more general for people with neuromuscular diseases. And actually, one of the things that have come out from that is that we think actually perhaps we need to look at the prescription process, because some of the devices might do quite similar things in terms of foot drop or stiffening the ankle, just in different ways with different materials. But actually, do we know what the sort of optimum pathway to prescribing the right thing is? So potentially that's going to be a bit of work that we're going to try and gather our heads together and see how we best do that. Then there's splinting of hands. So I'm very lucky, I've got some very good occupational therapy colleagues at Queen Square who have tried lots of different splints actually for people with CMT in terms of what works. This is a study, the only study I can really find on hand splinting from Holland. So this was a little thumb opposition splint, so where people had weakness and couldn't get the thumb forward to be able to do pinch movements, that little splint held the thumb in that position. And so it's a little study, there's only 13 people, but she found that there were some improvements in dexterity, people being able to do the fiddly things. And certainly we're looking at this, we have these little thumb spikers we'll be looking at, and our orthotics clinic have some lycra splints that we're looking at as well to see can we stimulate some of these effects. So that's something we're looking at clinically. And certainly in her study she found people quite like them. The nice thing with these little ones is you can just slip them on, slip them off again and put them in your pocket if you don't want to want to have them. But I think definitely with splints, just a bit of advice for you, because sometimes people have a really good experience with splints and orthoses. Sometimes people, they don't have a great experience, they just end up in the cupboard. And I think if you have a very thorough assessment by, depending on what type of splint, physio-OT or an orthotist or a podiatrist as well, because podiatrists often do insoles. So make sure that you've been well looked at and it's clear why you're getting it. I know that I do hear about people who just handed some plastic device out of a cupboard in a surgical appliance department. It's not great. People need to be looked at very carefully to try and work out what device will work best for them. And really a really good clinician, no matter what flavour of clinician, physio, OT, orthotist, they'll give you a device that's best matched to your, what we call mechanical needs, what you physically need, but also what's acceptable to you. And I think that's really important, because exactly what Mary said earlier, we could give you something that would have you, running around this room, but if it's bulky and you don't like the look of it and it's uncomfortable, you're not going to wear it. And I think that brings me to the next point. Never accept a device that rubs or gives you pain. Many of you have loss of sensation. You might not feel if your skin is breaking down. So if it's rubbing, when you first try it, it's rubbing, you go back. Be a bit of a pain, keep going back and get it sorted, get it altered and adjusted. So try them out, give feedback and get them adjusted properly. And I think that's really, really important. Okay, we know quite a bit about orthotics. It's gathering pace. We kind of know how they work now, and we know the different types that work in certain ways. What we don't know very much about is walking aids. And I'm looking around, I see a lot of walking aids. There's sticks, there's crutches, there's wheelchairs, there's hiking poles, there's all sorts. And as you know, as many of you know, you might go to a physio who's never heard of anyone with CMT, never heard of CMT, never really seen anyone like before, and so don't really know what might work best. So what we want to do is to try and gather some information, because there's no information out there about what works best for people and what the most useful types. And, it's interesting for us to know, actually, how do they help with balance and how do they prevent falls for people? And what do people think about using them? Do they hate them? I know, of course, being in London, some people really like having them when they're commuting on the tube because it means you always get a seat. So if you've got a stick, you get a seat, or you've got crutches, you get a seat. And also, do people use different things for different occasions? And do some things work best at other times? I think, again, it's a bit of an NHS thing to give one of the wooden walking sticks out, but actually that might not work all the time. So that's why we've got Magda's survey there. You can either do it online today, or we've got some slips with the web page in, or we've got some paper surveys, just so we can try and fill some gaps there and understand it better. Okay, so with fatigue, we know that there might be a little bit of a hint that doing some aerobic exercise can reduce fatigue, but hopefully our exercise study, fatigue is one of our measures that actually I'm personally very interested in. So it'd be good to see what changes with that. And it might be that strengthening muscles will help reduce their fatigability as well. And well, as soon as we know, we'll let you know. But also, this is where my other colleagues come in, occupational therapy colleagues, who have a lot of experience with fatigue management as a treatment, because they've often worked with people, other conditions where fatigue is a big feature, with multiple sclerosis, with Parkinson's disease, etc. And some of the principles that the OTs use are things like might be pacing, energy management. It might be that assistive devices are helpful. It might be that people require occupational assessments and adjustments in the workplace. As discussed earlier about the impact of fatigue on people working is not to be underestimated, when actually it looks like that could be a key reason why a lot of people stop working and retiring. So, and we're really lucky where we are. Our occupational therapy colleagues also have a specialised service called vocational rehabilitation, where they look at work issues and workplace. And so fatigue and also physical issues will be looked at as a whole to see how that's impacting on somebody's ability to keep working, if they want to. So, there's a lot there. There's a lot we're trying to do. There's a lot we're trying to piece together. And what's tricky is that, I've gathered a lot of knowledge over the years because I've been working with Mary for a long time now, about 12 years actually. And so, and we've done the research, we're doing more research. But where you are, there may not be physios with that level of experience and expertise. In fact, let's probably say there wouldn't be. But we are trying to change that. So I led a piece of work with Muscular Dystrophy UK of an online physiotherapy education module. So this was for neuromuscular diseases as a whole, but of course with me leading it, there's a big chunk on CMT. I made sure of it, got it in there. And it's on about different conditions. We talk about exercise, we talk about orthotics, we talk about fatigue, wheelchairs, we talk about respiratory complications, which are more pertinent in other conditions, and lots of different things. So why I'm letting you guys know this is that if you do come across a really enthusiastic physio who really wants to work with you, but actually doesn't seem that sure about CMT and wants to know more, point them to this. And it's... Sorry? Flyers at the back. Take the flyers. It's free for them. It's 11 lectures, which is a lot of work, but it's about nearly 600 physios have already signed up to it. So do let your physios know about it, and we've been getting great feedback actually. There's feedback rolling in all the time, sort of 4 stars, 5 stars, so people are finding it useful, and hopefully that will improve things a little bit in terms of knowledge. At the moment, for physios in the NHS, trying to get training is difficult because of all the budget cuts. So free learning, they're absolutely falling over themselves for it at the moment. So, into bringing it all together, there are lots of approaches that physios, but not just physios, as I've mentioned, or orthotist colleagues, or OT colleagues, but there's lots of approaches that we use as sort of rehabilitation professionals. And we're trying to best understand which treatments work best and how they work and how they help. And we are trying to educate physios how to manage people with neuromuscular diseases. But also, we're always really keen to know what you think, and actually what you think is important for research. And I know I spoke a couple of years ago and I was asking questions about balance and falls, and then it went on the Facebook page. That's been incredibly useful information that we've now used to actually plan Magda's PhD around that, and also the home-based balance study. So the feedback you've got has allowed us to be able to look at that in a certain way that hopefully then will be useful to you. And so just to come back to that living well with CMT, because that's our aim all the time, to actually help you and support you to do that. So I hope that there's been a little bit of knowledge from me there, and perhaps some resources might help you sort of reflect a little bit, and maybe think about how to take action with some of that. Do you have any questions?
Hello.
Hello.
It was about 2 years ago, I went to a lecture about muscle weakness and what we can do to prevent it and whatnot. This was more of a generalised lecture for people who were recovering from illness and were elderly, rather than anyone who had genetic diseases like CMT or muscular dystrophy. And one of the things I remember from that is that a lot of falls are caused by, I think it's the tibialis anterior, the muscle in the front of the shin.
Yeah.
And that a lot of balance work goes through that muscle. So if it's weak or it's too long, then that causes a lot of falls in like healthy people.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering what that does for people with CMT, and whether your own knowledge and research says something similar or says something different.
We know when you're moving around dynamically, tibialis anterior, so it's the muscle that sits here, is very important for balance, but also the calf muscles are very, very important for standing balance. Unfortunately, with CMT, that's actually one of the early muscles that tends to get affected. So that's where, if we know that that muscle is affected and we're unlikely to get a strengthening effect, if I do my little anti-gravity test and people are only scoring, is only twitching a little bit, that's when we might go to our colleagues and say, right, we need to support the ankle with something external, some sort of bracing device. But then you can still work on the strength and the balance reactions higher up. And that's sort of the basis of what this pilot study is going to be about. So I'm saying we haven't tested it out yet, but the theory is there. I'm sort of kind of seeing it a bit in practice, but we need to actually test it properly to see, because I could be really biased and think that everybody's responding beautifully to my treatment, but we need to actually test it really objectively. So that's why we're doing that work. But if people still have a degree of strength there, then we'll work on that. But in CMT, it tends not to be in that particular muscle. But the calf muscles are very interesting, and we're very interested in that. And we notice when people get a lot of calf weakness, when I'm standing still, it's my calf muscles that kind of pull me back, because the body's like a pendulum. If you turn it upside down, we're like an inverted pendulum over the ankle is like the hinge. And so it's the calf muscle that helps to bring us back when we pitch forward. So if that muscle is weak, as it is with some, not everybody, but with some people, then we find that other areas of competency, people tend to bob their knees or they tend to step around. And some of you might recognise that standing still is actually much harder than walking. Yeah.
I was just going to say, sorry.
Yeah.
My son's got drop foot, or I've got the opposite, I've got claw feet. And I just wondered how the different muscles work. They're the same group of muscles, but how are they affected differently?
Yeah. that comes back to the question earlier. But from a mechanical perspective, often it depends on which muscles get weak. What you often find with muscles, they tend to work in sort of pairs of groups. So if we think really simply about like the elbow, so you've got the biceps which pull the elbow up and the triceps. So they kind of oppose each other, but actually they help each other to move the elbow smoothly. It's a bit more complicated in the foot because there's lots of joints, but it's not dissimilar. And so if you get some muscles that weaken, say the triceps got weak, but the biceps were still really strong, that would dominate. But what happens over time, that would mean that the elbow would start to get really stuck in that position. So that's often why we see this deformity, because that balance of the muscles is gone, because some muscles have got weaker earlier than others. Sometimes if the foot is very floppy and you don't have that, sometimes it might be because it's come on later. It might be that actually all of the muscles are weak at the same time, so you don't have this imbalance. It varies with different types of CMT and different onsets.
What are your views about electric stimulation device?
Electrical stimulation. I'm going to draw you a picture. I get asked about this a lot. The way electrical stimulation, functional electrical stimulation, which is probably what you're referring to, the way it works. So say we've got a muscle here, that's like a muscle belly, and we have, that's the motor nerve going to it, and that nerve goes into the spinal cord, okay? And that's all, we know that's all normal. But then you have the sensory nerve, so the message goes down and that's what activates the muscle. But you also have feedback from that, from the sensory nerves that go back, and they relay with each other in the spine. Okay? This is what we call a reflex loop. And how functional electrical stimulation works is you'll get stimulation and it uses this loop to actually get the muscle active. However, in CMT, the motor nerve may actually not be there, lowered in the lower muscles or the sensory nerve. So you don't have this reflex arc. So functional electrical stimulation doesn't work when you have neuropathy. It will work for people who've had stroke or people who might have MS because they still have this. Their problem is in the brain and spinal cord, but this bit is still intact. So you can still get in and stimulate that from the bottom, and that works very nicely. Unfortunately, it doesn't. There are ways of that people might stimulate directly onto the muscle, but you need really high currents, and people find that very uncomfortable. And also, as we know over time, if you're not getting the messages to the muscle does waste and becomes fatty. So you actually haven't got the tissue there to stimulate anyway. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work with neuropathy. But you may well have seen it talked about a lot in MS or in stroke. Sorry? Yeah. It doesn't work because you haven't got this reflex.
I wear sappos, which I find are really, really good.
Yeah.
But I've been recommended to wear a night splint on my right foot. Do they work?
Well, there's been one study of night splints, actually, from colleagues in Australia, and they looked at, there were sort of young adults, teenagers with CMT. It was a very small study, and what they found was they compared the night splint to just normal stretching. And I think initially the night splints gave a slightly better effect, but over time the effect was about the same as with the stretching. But some people do find them quite convenient, because if you stretch a muscle over a long period of time, and you find that easier than perhaps doing the stretches, some people just find the night splints quite uncomfortable because they're often sort of plastic and heavy. That's often why people don't use them. In fact, in that study, they did find there was issues with people wanting to use them because of the discomfort. But I think if you get into a really good stretching regime, from that one small study, it's possible that actually the stretching regime is good enough, but I can't say that with a big load of research behind me. We're still not sure, but certainly that it didn't seem to be that different over the longer term. Oh, I'm being told to. We can have a chat afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.